Hi, I'm Phil Cole. I'm Executive Director of the Iowa Association of Community Action Agencies, and it's my pleasure to welcome you and thank you for coming to the release of our annual State of Poverty Report in Ohio, the 2016 report. Community action agencies work to alleviate poverty and empower low-income families in their communities. For over 50 years, community action agencies have provided the tools to help people move from poverty to self-sufficiency. Members of the Ohio Association of Community Action Agencies employ over 6,500 people, Ohioans, all Ohioans, and serve more than 800,000 low-income individuals in a typical year. I'm going to talk to you for a few minutes about the broad categories of the report, including some comments about the federal budget and also about some current Ohio legislation. Then I'm going to turn it over to Lynette Cook, who's the Executive Director of Community Research Partners, who will discuss more details of the report with you and how they did the research. Today we're releasing the State of Poverty in Ohio, a portrait of Ohio families. According to the federal government's definition of poverty, there were more than 1.6 million people in Ohio below the federal poverty level in 2015. That is 14.8% of the population. Now, we have maintained for years that this definition is faulty and needs to be revised. And most people who look at these issues understand and agree that the federal guidelines for the federal poverty rate is an understatement. It does not accurately include real cost of living, and thereby it creates a number that is very low. Some other ways to more accurately, there are some more other ways to more accurately measure poverty. Some are discussed in this report, others have been discussed in previous years. We believe the accurate measure of poverty is the self-sufficiency standard. That standard is the amount of income a household needs to adequately meet its basic needs without public or private support. It is the level of self-sufficiency. OACA does not believe that a person is out of poverty because, for example, they get adequate food stamps or government subsidized child care. We believe a person is no longer in poverty if they're able to sustain themselves and their families without either public or private assistance. Unfortunately, the self-sufficiency standard marks Ohio's poverty rate as about twice as high as the federal poverty rate. If we intend to get the poverty rate down, we need to focus on the things that matter, which is what the federal budget should be about. Let me talk for a minute about the federal budget. I was in D.C. last week when the federal budget was introduced, and I looked at some of the sections that affected programs for the poor and others. I believe the Trump budget proposed that 62 programs be eliminated entirely. Anti-poverty programs, education programs, health programs, the arts, and many others. Then I listened to OMB Director Mick Mulvaney describe the budget as, quote, compassionate, close quote. I think George Orwell would have appreciated a new definition of the word. Mulvaney said it was compassionate because people get to keep more of, quote, their tax dollars, close quote. Of course, those who pay less tax are not those whose lifelines are being cut. In other words, the Trump administration proposes to drape their compassion over those who don't really need it. When people work in a group together, each must ask, am I in this for the benefit of me or for the benefit of the group? In a society, the question must be answered with some type of balance between those two interests. Mulvaney's attitude and the Trump budget are symbolic of what we have seen for the last several years. For the last 3 or 4 decades, we have seen the balance tip almost entirely to those who are well off, as the benefits have been aimed at helping them through the philosophy that helping them will lead to help for others. It's the trickle-down theory, and it has not worked. What have we seen in those years? We've seen widespread income disparity caused by lack of increase in the minimum wage, tax cuts for the wealthy, a lack of profit sharing with employees by corporate leadership, and the elimination of jobs with good pay and benefits by automation and outsourcing. We have seen the elimination of union jobs and benefits and less collective bargaining. America has crumbling roads and crumbling bridges that could have been maintained by workers who were paid a good wage. This is an example of work that can be done with a good paying job. All of these things can be changed by public policy designed to work for us all. Instead, we have changed our priorities. For decades, we have seen major tax cuts that have left society with too little revenue to maintain the foundations of society, schools, healthcare, roads, bridges, clean water, food for those who need it, a strong defense, and other things. We have not received the promise of those tax cuts, which were that they would create jobs. Instead of jobs, we've only lost revenue. And government has repeatedly struggled to replace that revenue. It's led to a game of robbing Peter to pay Paul. To spend money on the poor. One year you take it from the schools, and next year you take the schools, you take it from clean water and fresh air. Next year government takes from the poor and gives it to use for roads and bridges. This year, the 45th president proposes to close programs for the poor and many others to pay for a massive military buildup. That's this year's proposed trade-off. With all those tax cuts, there's not been enough left for maintenance of what is needed, and the most important of those are human needs. Another thing that has occurred over this time is the rise of payday lenders. If I can veer off into a state issue for a second. And this is an entire industry that makes money off of people being poor. We thought this industry was reined in back in 2008 when we did reforms then, but they found ways around the reforms and the situation is worse. I ask you to watch the Ohio General Assembly and House Bill 123. I think it's Representative Kaler and Ashford, and I think it's in the House Government and Oversight Committee right now. This is good legislation that keeps these lenders in business as the funders of legitimate loans, but will require them to play the game fairly. We need to quit stacking the deck at the federal and state levels against those who have the least among us. Small loans are needed, but loans that create dependency on our industry are not. Let's clean this up with House Bill 123. Now, Governor Kasich has done an excellent job with his expansion of Medicaid, but now we're hearing in the General Assembly and Congress discussions about putting on work requirements. There is always an effort to punish the poor for some reason. There's always a belief that they're not deserving, that they have to work harder for a benefit. Why is it that we find it so important to add to the struggles of poor people? Healthcare is important for everyone, and we need to quit trying to make it harder to get. There is no work requirement for mortgage interest deduction or to claim a tax credit for a contribution to a candidate for state senate. Should we put work requirements on those? Now, this year we subtitled our report, A Portrait of Ohio's Families. This is because I wanted community research partners to take a good look at the economics of different family groups, beginning with grandparents who became the parents of their grandchildren. While this may not be a new phenomenon, it appears to be occurring in numbers much greater than before and across all income levels. My question to CRP was, what is the economic effect on middle-class grandparents who unexpectedly became parents to their grandchildren? We know there are two groups at issue here. One of grandparents with formal legal custody and one who have the informal custody. As we show in the report, there are nearly 40,000 grandparent households with grandchildren in Ohio. That's the official number. About 22% live in poverty and about 42% have no parent present. Because of inadequate funding for kinship care assistance and because it is very hard to measure the number of grandparents caring for children when they do not have legal custody, it's difficult to determine how they've been affected economically. The question I asked is a new question, and we don't have a good answer to my question today. But we're going to continue to look at this because I think it's important that we know the percent of grandparent households in poverty that were not in poverty before they assumed responsibility for their grandchildren and why this custody occurred. As everybody knows, poverty is not a new issue. I mean, it's discussed in the Bible. But we are seeing it in more situations than ever, and we have more questions than ever. Another one now is how many of these grandparent-headed households have no parent present because of the opioid epidemic? Yesterday, the Franklin County Opioid Crisis Summit was held, and the numbers were shocking. I had a little discussion with Orman Hall afterwards, and he was telling me things that are really frightening. And it's about deaths. One of the other effects of these drugs is the economic devastation of families. Families are falling into poverty because of drugs. A second issue in this report is that a single parent with 2 children must work 109 hours per week to reach self-sufficiency at minimum wage. That's immoral, and no family can survive on that. The third issue we raise is one that seems to be quite new, and that is hunger on campus. A number of college campuses have food pantries for students who cannot afford to eat if they also bother to pay for classes and buy the books. This is a fairly new topic and the data is very fresh. According to the College and University Food Bank Alliance, last year there were 240 campuses that had food pantries for their students. And now we know that 3 months after that count, there's 400. In the report, we have listed 12 in Ohio, and that was last year's total. I know, because I've heard at least one more, and I know that 12 is not the right number, that's what. The really shocking thing when you think about this is that at least one of these campuses has now opened their food pantry to their staff. It's a public college. It's a public college where people are getting a paycheck from the state of Ohio. Now, it may be part-time, it may be adjunct faculty, but they're getting a paycheck from the state of Ohio, and in the end, they still qualify for the food pantry. Our anecdotal evidence says that most of these students, probably the majority, who use the pantries are non-traditional students, older and often than children. But there are also traditional students here too. I think one of the largest universities in this state, that happens to be in Columbus that I won't name, has a food pantry started by students because they saw other students, traditional students, who couldn't afford to eat. This can show us many things, but one may be that for too many Ohioans, public universities are no longer affordable. You've all seen the numbers on student loan debt. Everybody knows about that. It's the next big bubble, supposedly it's going to explode. It may be because, this unaffordability may be because the percentage of support for public universities has dropped, look over the last 20 or 25 years, or because wages have been stagnant, or because they don't spend the money efficiently, or a combination of all those factors. What we know is that because of costs, this path to economic advancement has narrowed. It hasn't closed, of course, but it's narrowed. However, as the Columbus Dispatch pointed out on Tuesday in their series on income inequality and segregation in Central Ohio, apprenticeships are available in this state, and companies need people. So we need to ensure that we tell students that if they want to be financially stable and in the middle class, there are other quality options besides regular four-year colleges and the debt that now requires. For example, apprenticeships with trades and corporations can meet a wage of $50,000 with benefits and no college debt. That's good, honest work and a smart thing for some people to do, and the need is there. Let's take a look at the things that can help bring people out of poverty. What the state needs to do is the same. They don't change. We didn't write them in this issue of the report because they're the same. They don't change. We just need to do them. But I'm going to remind you of some of them anyway. First, the need for jobs that will pay well and provide benefits. You don't need to see this in writing. People know that the best way out of poverty is a good job. A few years ago, the answer was the Utica shale boom. Remember that one? No, that didn't work out because the jobs just weren't there. But that reminded us that there are jobs and people are trained to do them. The answer is real job training for jobs that exist or will exist in the near future. And apprenticeships are good, as I said before. I know the Kasich administration is working on a good workforce development in partnership with business. That's a hopeful sign. The good thing we could have gotten from the Utica shale boom was a solid revenue base, and we still can. That's not over. Instead of increasing the tax on car owners through a tripling of the registration fee, as has been proposed in legislation, let's raise our taxes on these oil companies by raising our tax on shale oil and gas up to the national average. I ask you, who can more afford a new tax? The minimum wage fast food worker with a 20-year-old car or the multi-billion-dollar oil and gas company? Second, the need for reliable transportation. People often can find jobs in neighboring cities, but they don't have the means to get to the job. That's a problem. Government often says we cannot afford mass transit, but can we afford to continue to pay Medicaid and unemployment instead? Doesn't it attract employers when a state can show a transportation system that can get people to their jobs and from their jobs? Mass transit takes vision and it takes time. The General Assembly should at least consider a test fund. Third is the need for lifelong learning. Education from preschool to adult education contributes to individual and community self-sufficiency and prosperity. This is common knowledge, it's not something new. Fourth is the need for affordable housing. Housing is a primary means of stabilizing society. We need to continue to move on building affordable housing and promoting energy assistance to drive down costs of utilities for all homeowners and residents, to make homes more affordable that way. The Trump budget eliminates almost all of these programs. Now, some of you have been here throughout the years that we've done this report. I think it's been about at least 20 that we've done it here. In the past, I've said that I think you will see some improvement next year. I'm not saying that this year. The inequality in incomes is real. The segregation of the population is real. Government must do its job for all of us, providing social guarantees, education, health care, roads, job training, safe products, affordable housing, clean air, and all the other things. Let's work on these things this year, and then we can look forward to a more positive report next year. All right, we've got to work on these things. Now, before I yield the podium to Lynette Cook,